welcome everyone for the lecture. First, I will introduce our guest in Polish and then in English, so it will be a bit of talking. Szanowni Państwo, bardzo się cieszę, że Państwo są z nami. Witamy na wykładzie profesora Björna Sundmarka z Malmö Uniwersytetu. Najpierw zapowiem króciutko gościa po polsku, potem po angielsku. Też powiem, że nasz wykład jest nagrywany, ale nie będziemy nagrywać części dyskusji i pytań, więc liczymy, że będą Państwo pytania zadawać i naszego gościa tutaj integrować o sprawy związane z muminkami. Mamy w tym roku wyjątkową rocznicę, 80-lecie publikacji pierwszej książki z cyklu sagi o muminkach Tove Jansson, więc włączamy się poniekąd razem z naszym zespołem do spraw badań literaturą i kulturą dziecięcą UAM w te obchody oraz naszym kołem zajmującym się literaturą dziecięcą. Cieszymy się, że Państwo z nami są. Nasz gość, profesor Björn Sundmark, jest badaczem i krytykiem literatury dziecięcej oraz profesorem literatury angielskiej na Uniwersytecie w Malmö w Szwecji. Jest również autorem, badaczem, a też autorem książki Picturebooka dla dzieci. Jeszcze go nie mamy w Polsce, ale być może, prawda, się to zmieni. Od jakiegoś czasu zajmuje się przede wszystkim właśnie badaniami nad Tove Jansson, nad cyklem o muminkach i przygotowuje książkę poświęconą właśnie tej twórczości, więc wyglądamy tej książki jak najbardziej już za jakiś czas. Alright, so now I'll switch into English. So welcome again, everyone. I'll just say quickly that we are recording our lecture, but no for the Q&A session, so feel free to ask questions. They won't be recorded. Let us welcome together Professor Björn Sundmark from Malmö University, who will be talking about, as you can see, Moominalism, Tove Jansson and the art of the miniature. Björn is a literary scholar and English scholar in Malmö, so he's also working on Tove Jansson right now, the Moominsa cycle. So he's preparing a book about Moomins, and Björn, when you are expecting the book to be published, or is it too early to say?
It is too early to say.
Too early to say,
yes.
Right. But
it's under consideration with the publishers, Oxford University Press, right now.
Okay,
yes.
right, good. But Björn is also an author of a picture book. Can you see the title in Swedish?
Klättra I träd.
Yeah. It's like
climbing trees.
That's right. Okay, so I think that's I'm done. So Björn, the floor is yours. Welcome again, and
thank you very much for that, Alexandra. I'm very excited to be here, and thank you for inviting me, Alexandra and Anna, to here to Poznaniu to give this lecture. It's an honor and privilege to be here, and I'm also honored to see so many people turn out for this lecture today. I'll be very happy to share with you what I have been working on with the Tove Jansson and the Moomin books. First of all, just a few words. Well, here's maybe the researcher in me over the years, as those of you who read Tove Jansson know, these creatures kind of reflect different aspects of our character, I believe. And when I was little, I was thought of myself as a Moomin troll, or maybe as a Snufkin, or something like that. But now I've realized that I am really a researcher. That's maybe the core of what I'm doing. So at least today, when I'm going to present this material. First of all, just a few things. That's me, by the way, to the right. So you can see that this is not something that I've just picked up in the last couple of years. It's been a lifelong obsession with me, reading and being part of the Moomin world. But I've also included a couple of my published works so far. So I began writing about the Moomin world, the Moominverse, with paying attention to the maps, because maps, literary maps, fantasy maps have also been a great interest of mine. And for those of you who have read the books, you know that almost all of the books have fantastic maps in them. So I wrote about mapping Moominland for the Lion and the Unicorn. I've also written about her other work as an illustrator of Lewis Carroll and of Tolkien's The Hobbit. These are, I believe, areas where there has been too little research so far. But anyway, I wanted to show, so in that second article, but also here in this one, The Aesthetics of Tolkienian Fantasy, and Tove Jansson's illustrations for The Hobbit, I tried to discuss how we visualize fantasy and fantasy worlds, but by bringing in Tove Jansson into the equation. I've also written about the comics in Swedish so far, but maybe there will be something in English on that as well, because the comics are, I believe, another under-researched area. The comics were what made Tove Jansson an international celebrity in the children's literature world, not really the novels. It was the comics that opened the world for the Moomin trolls, as it were. And then we come to what I did here last year, or the year before that. I stumbled across a couple of art, or a chapter in Gaston Bachelard about the poetics of space. And I just realized that this would be very, very applicable to Tove Jansson and her work and her life. So I wrote about Moomin. Here I spell it in a Swedish way, but I'm used to the English term as a heading for this talk today. And as I said before, there is a book proposal right now for the Children's Classics Critically series in Oxford University Press. So hopefully I will be able to write a contract on that and then finish the book soon. All right, so I will now switch to a more sort of formal part of because otherwise I would be talking here for hours. You don't want that. So I'm going now to keep to my manuscript for a while, and then after that I will again talk more freely. Okay, so while you look at this picture, let me start with the reading. Tove Jansson's Moominland is large. There are deep seas, high mountains, and endless forests. It is a place of momentous catastrophes and long journeys. But Moominland's dimensions are also relative, and the apparent grandeur of the setting is constituted on the small size of most of the creatures that inhabit it, as little My and the little creature Sniff. The Moomin trolls are small too, an artist's signature to begin with, and tiny trolls in the very first book of the series, which actually incidentally was published 80 years ago this year. In fact, size matters in Moominland and is indicated throughout the Moomin narratives in various ways. So in this presentation I will analyze and discuss a few of these examples of Jansson's art of the miniature, or Moominalism, to use a Jansson-related neologism. The main aim, however, is to show that Jansson's predilection for the small, the diminutive, and the decorative is not merely about creating contrast, even if it is that too, but essentially about small-scale world building. Moomin Valley itself comes across as a miniature reimagining of her grandfather's island paradise, as described in the first chapter of the autobiographical Sculptor's Daughter, a book that I highly recommend also. It's a fantastic biography that she writes there. And this island paradise, or this Moomin Valley, is at the center, or her grandfather's place, is at the center of this minimizing project. The maps of Moomin Valley, welcome, please. The maps of Moomin Valley, as well as the comic strips, and the use of vignettes, elaborate initial letters, dollhouses. All of these represent condensations of, or points of entry to, her creative world. We also witness how Jansson's creative characters in turn engage in acts and make use of things that relate in different ways to the aesthetics of the miniature. Moomin Mama's bark boat, Moomin Papa's crystal ball, and the lighthouse model, the Philly Jock's shadow play, the Hemula's magnifying glass that we saw on the very first slide, and so on. And here we have, so we have the map here with all of these details. We have the cover of Moomin Papa's memoirs, which is made in this archaic style with great attention to detail. I will talk more about that soon. And of course the comic strips again. The study and the idea that I had for this analysis, it draws on Gaston Bachelard's essay on the miniature, which is in the chapter 7 of the Poetics of Space. My claim is that Jansson's Moominalism is a particularly good example of what he calls the miniaturizing imagination. Bachelard does not discuss children's literature per se, but as Lisa Sainsbury has shown in her book, Ethics in British Children's Literature, Bachelard's theoretical framework provides a very good fit to children's literature, from fairy tales such as, here we have a couple of examples, Nils Holgersson, Thumbelina, The Borrowers, here in the Studio Ghibli version, Elsa Beskow, The Sun Egg, and Toy Story here. Like there are numerous examples, of course, from all literatures. Second, according to Lisa Sainsbury, this was a little bit premature, let's stay on this picture. According to Sainsbury, the child reader is uniquely positioned to, as she says, engage with the issues raised by the miniature. In her study, The Child That Haunts Us, Symbols and Images in Fairy Tale and Miniature Literature. And we can think of fairies and lots of other subgenres. However, in these studies, the focus is on the child reader and the fictional child character, rather than on other aspects of the miniature, which I wanted to highlight. Elina Drucker, professor of children's literature in Stockholm, has also mentioned Bachelard in the context of Tove Jansson, but mostly looked at how the use of contrast. And now we turn to the next picture here. So my point, and what I've found was very useful, was that we don't only, the idea of the miniature is applicable not only to the Moomin books, but to Tove Jansson's life as well. I would argue that Tove Jansson herself was uniquely suited for the miniature life, with parents who gravitated between the monumental and the minimal. Her father's sculptures, the monumental sculptures that he made, and her mother's illustrations for books, but also stamps. For many decades, she made stamps, finished stamps. So if you're collecting stamps from the 50s or 60s, it's a good, probably many of them were made by Han, which was the signature of, or Tove Jansson's mother. One could also refer to Tove Jansson's own interest in collecting mementos, souvenirs, her engagement with an early investment in Moomin merchandise, the handmade trolls, things like that. Her work on the Moomin house. These are from her studio, which is still in the possession of the family, the Jansson family, and where walking around there, I noticed that there's so much carefully chosen details, like this conch shell, this lighthouse model, this message in a bottle, things like that. And here's also, of course, you see here when she was working on the first commercially available Moomin trolls, and the Moomin house, which she made together with Tulliki Pietila, and which her brother, Kulturą Dziecięcą, who was a photographer, also worked on. All of this shows her interest and her commitment to the miniature, I would argue. So, my point is that Tove Jansson's miniaturist art is not restricted to words and pictures, but to artifacts and architecture as well. Almost every aspect of Tove Jansson's work, in that we can see the miniaturist in action. I'm talking about dollhouses. They crop up in her writing as well. The miniature lighthouse in Moomin Papa at Sea, the short story, The Dollhouse, in the collection Art in Nature. And in that story, for instance, a dollhouse project becomes an all-consuming passion, and it threatens to undermine the friendship between two partners. In Moomin Papa at Sea, the model lighthouse and the map of the valley, including the lighthouse, serve as what Bachelard calls apple seeds of the imagination, something that can grow, something that can become something more significant and become real. We can see this exemplified. Oh, by the way, I should also mention these. These are also from her studio, and these are, some of these she made herself, some were made by Tulliki, her life partner, and some maybe by someone else in the family. And I was particularly struck by the one standing behind here. Can anyone here guess which Moomin figure that is supposed to be? That's for the real Moomin nerds here. Yes?
I'm not sure, but Miss Isabel?
Sorry?
Miss Isabel, maybe?
Not Miss Isabel, but very good guess, I would say. It's a person where we only see the face in an illustration on one picture in the entire. So it's a hard one. Because in most of the other pictures, we only see, or nothing at all, or we see her body.
The invisible...
The Invisible Child. Mimi in The Invisible Child. I thought it was so fascinating that if you have read that story, she gradually appears, but her head does not appear until she becomes aggressive right at the end, wants to save Moomin Mama and bites the tail of Moomin Papa. And little Mimi has said before to her, you will never get your face back, you will never get your head back unless you can get angry. You need to get angry. And she gets angry, she gets her head back. But what I find particularly interesting is that with Tove Jansson's own doll here, she only represents the head. I thought that was super interesting. I don't know what it means, but I just find it very fascinating. Anyway, let's move on to this example. So, my point here was that with the lighthouse, that the lighthouse is one of these apple seeds of the imagination. So let's look at one quotation. In this depiction that follows, we have a description of the lighthouse which gradually becomes more and more real. And this is indicated by the identification of Moominpappa and Moomintroll with the place, and the use of the present tense, for instance, to tell what they're doing in the lighthouse. Okay. Look at these iron clamps, he said. This is the Moominpappa talking now. They're buried in the rock, and this is how you climb up to the lighthouse. You have to be very careful if the weather is rough. Your boat is carried in toward the rock on the crest of a wave. Then you jump off, get a firm grip, and scramble up while the boat is flung back. When the next wave comes, you're safe. Then you fight your way against the wind, holding onto this railing. Then you open the door, but it's heavy. Now it slams behind you. You're inside the lighthouse. You can hear the roar of the sea in the distance through the thick walls. Outside, it's roaring all around, and the boat is already a long way off. Are we inside too? Asked Moomintroll. Of course, said Moominpappa. You're right out here in the tower. A similar epiphany occurs when Moomintroll focuses on the fly-speck small dot on the big map hanging on the wall, the one showing Moomin Valley with the coast and its islands. Moomin Mama has just pointed it out to him, and he starts thinking about it. And here's the next quote. And suddenly, he saw the sea around the island begin to rise and fall. The island itself was green, with red cliffs. It was the island he had seen in picture books, a desert island inhabited by pirates. So again, a miniature, a map in this case, transforms into imagined reality. The world is big and dangerous in Jansson's Moominverse, and its inhabitants are small. And as I said initially, they were even smaller originally. And this is not surprising, given that Moomintroll started out as part of Tove's signature in her artwork. I didn't include the signature here, but you saw it on a previous slide. Being small can either be good or dangerous. On the first page of The Moomins and the Great Flood, the first Moomin book, when Moomintroll is feeling anxious, his mother comforts him and says, I hope we're so small that we won't be noticed if something dangerous should come along. In this first Moomin book, the trolls are only a few inches tall. A snake appears as a giant serpent, and Moomin Mama is almost devoured by a sand lion. They ride on the back of a marabou stork and sail on a big round water lily, and they are able to light their way with big glowing flowers. The Moomintrolls may be small, but in relation to the little creature who they befriend on their quest, which is Sniff, they appear large. Here we see the first meeting with Sniff there, who is the little creature. And in the first book, Sniff is actually too small to have a name. In the second book, he returns, bigger, more personality, and with a name. And one couldn't compare these pictures here. These three are from the first book, but these two are from the first story in Tales from Moomin Valley. And in the Spring Tune, the first short story, there's a creature, quote, who is so small that he hasn't got a name, but whose personality and attitude grows significantly after a Snufkin gives the creep the name Titiwu. The contrast between the big and threatening world and the smallness of all living things is borne out in another story from Tales from Moomin Valley. Here's the Fillyjonk who believed in disasters, and here's what she says to Gafsy, her neighbor. Dear Gafsy, believe me, we are so very small and insignificant, and so are our tea cakes and carpets and all those things, you know, and still they're so important, but always they're threatened by mercilessness. The Fillyjonk may be small and insignificant, yet it is interesting that she names the small things that we surround us with and calls them important. Maybe it's because she's a Fillyjonk, but there is more to it than that, I believe. Jansson recognizes that it is by naming and identifying all these little things in our lives that we build imaginatively our world. Things and details can clutter our lives and imaginings. This is the Philly Jock streak in all of us. And we need to be able to let go, Snufkin-like, to the things that bind us and grow out of hand. But the small things are important too. Something we are reminded about in this story, where nothing remains of the Philly Jock's old home at the end, except a smiling, chipped china kitten and her carpets. And for those of you who have not read this story, she has terrible anxiety over both the fact that she is in this big house that she has inherited with all the things, and that stifles her, what we say. But on the other hand, she also has anxiety over impending disaster. But when the disaster finally comes and her house is shattered, everything destroyed, she's released, unburdened, and she's no longer afraid. The crisis has already appeared, has been come, and that is actually the solution in a way. These are two images that I've already shown, but I'll return to them. Decoration and detail can serve to conjure up an imaginative space. The cover of Moominpappa's memoir, the memoirs of Moominpappa, with its wreath made up of the dramatis personae of Moominpappa's early life, is interfoliated with meticulously rendered flowers, and this can serve as one example. But the love of detail and condensation is also present in the vignettes, the elaborate first letters, and the chapter summaries of the same book, which of course also are kind of not parody, but using a kind of 19th century way of having chapter summaries in the beginning. So here's one example. Introducing the muddler and the jockster in my memoirs, presenting Edward the Booble and giving a spirited account of the Ocean Extra and its matchless launching. So what does this have to do with the miniature? Well, particularly maybe the cover here reminds me of what Bachelard writes about medieval illuminated manuscripts. And what he says, a quotation from Bachelard is, he talks about the patience that brings peace to one's fingers in filling a single letter with as many details and beauty as possible. And Bachelard goes on to say that the miniaturist master, he says, must love space to describe it as minutely as though there were world molecules to enclose an entire spectacle in a molecule drawing. I think that's a beautiful metaphor, world molecules, that the detail is not just something random, it's made with such care that out of it can grow a whole world. And it also actually resonates a lot with how Jansson herself described the enormous sort of patience with how she worked on her illustrations, either by working, putting in enormous work on just one painting, or in her later work where she often made maybe 20, 30 versions of the same illustration until she got exactly the right, got it the way she wanted it. I would argue that Jansson is such a master, and not only in her decorative pieces, but also in her more time-consuming, detailed, full-page illustrations. And for example, in her end-paper maps like this one. And then, for instance, in the article that I wrote about her maps, I showed that this is not just a map, but it's actually condensed time and space. For in this map, you have all the significant places. You have the hat on the top. This is from Trollkarlens hat, the Finn family Moomin troll is called in English. but on top, on the first chapter, they find the magician's hat on top of the mountain. But all of the other significant places, like the sandbank and where the hat ends up later, and many of all the places that are significant are here. So this is not just a snapshot, it's not just a map, it's a condensed time, space. The whole book is there, in a way, one could say. Another way of expressing it is to say that these maps display a love of space and spectacle and are made up of world molecules. It's also interesting to look at what the Moomin characters do. Miniature world making is something that the Moomin trolls themselves engage in. So I've already mentioned Moomin Papa's lighthouse model. Now let us turn to Moomin Mama as a miniaturist. Maybe the first example that comes to mind is her fresco in Moomin Papa at Sea, where she is very much, she's homesick. She wants to go home to the valley. She doesn't want to be on the lighthouse island. And she makes this painting of Moomin Valley, her garden. And she makes it so well that eventually she can move into it. She can go into the painting and sit there under a tree. But I'm not going to analyze that more today, but that's, of course, an example, a very good example. So my other example is in the first chapter of Moomin Summer Madness, where Moomin Mama is making a bark boat, a schooner. In a foreshadowing of what is to come in that story, a big black flake of soot lands amidships on the deck of the schooner, interrupting Moomin Mama and her work. She rises and goes to Moomin Troll. He has been lying by a pond all the time. He knows that she's making a bark boat for him and wonders if it will come with, quote, a dinghy so small that you hardly dare take it in your paw. It is an exquisite model ship, but Moomin Mama has forgotten to make the dinghy, even though it balanced beautifully over its own reflection and started away in the port tack as if manned by old souls. The miniature ship is already imbued with potential. In the very last chapter, the ship is miraculously after the tsunami that hits the valley and all their adventures. When they come back in the last chapter, they find it. The backstay had gotten entangled in a bush, but it was undamaged. Even the little hatch was in its place over the hold. In a sense, the lucky fate of the seaworthy bark ship replicates that of the Moomin trolls through their tsunami adventure. It was as if nothing had ever happened and as if no danger could ever threaten them again. Yet, something has happened. Adventure has happened. And Moomin Mama, in a final act, perfects the ship and the story by giving Moomin Troll the dinghy. It is as if the entire story has been played out to arrive at this precise point, where the model schooner and its dinghy can sail away immaculately. Finally, a few words about the dangers of the miniature and creative impulse associated with the miniature. For the art of the miniature is also about taking control of one's creation. The miniature must be controlled or dominated, to use the Bachelardian term. Otherwise, it can turn on its author, creator, and do damage. For this purpose, Moomin Papa's crystal ball is perfect. And Bachelard writes about the crystal ball also. And he says, the dreamer can renew his own world merely by moving his face. From the miniature of the glass assist, he can call forth an entire world and oblige it to make the most unwanted contortions. This example points to another instance from Moomin Papa at Sea, where the first chapter is called The Family in the Crystal Ball, and where Moomin Papa uses his crystal for this purpose, to control and conjure forth his private family fantasy. And here's the quote. Their reflections made them seem incredibly small, and the crystal ball made all their movements seem forlorn and aimless. Moominpappa liked this. It was his evening game. It made him feel that they all needed protection, that they were at the bottom of a deep sea that only he knew about. But the crystal ball also comes in handy in Moomin Valley in November, the last Moomin book. The book, one could say, where Tove Jansson says goodbye to the Moomin world. It was also written the same year that her mother died. So in a sense, and of course Moominpappa C was written the year and dedicated to the memory of her father who died previously there. So one can see that those two last books is kind of a long goodbye to the Moomin world in a way. In that final, let's see what I have on this page. Yeah, maybe I should move to this one. In this final book, the little creature Toft, and just you can also look at the creature here and think about pictures of Tove Jansson herself. That this seems very much like Boel Westin has pointed out, that this is a Tove Jansson self-portrait in some ways, Tove Toft, and also in the likeness here. In this final novel, the little creature Toft fantasizes about Moomin Valley and the Moomin family. But after he has gone to the now deserted valley, he finds it harder and harder to see them in his imagination. Instead, he finds comfort in a large book on natural history down there. Here's a quote from it. It was a very big book, which had no beginning and no end, and the pages were all faded and had been nibbled by rats at the edges. In it, he reads about a sea creature, a minuscule numeralite. Gradually, the developing story reality of the numeralite takes over. Toft, and here's another quote, tried to describe the happy family, the Moomin Trolls, but he couldn't. Then he told himself all about the solitary creature instead, the little numeralite, who had something on Noctiluca about him and liked electricity. The numeralite was, quote, evidently very tiny and became even tinier when he was frightened. But after a while, when Toft imagines it, electric thunderstorms are let loose over Moomin Valley, and the numeralite starts growing. It also affects Toft's temperament, making him angry. Eventually, the numeralite becomes a threatening presence and prowls around the house, until Toft confronts it, and it is finally absorbed by Moominpappa's crystal ball. Not only, of course, is there similarity between Toft and Tove, but consider also the similarity between Moomin and numeralite. It's also, again, a kind of play on the sounds of these words. And maybe Tove Jansson also felt herself threatened by her own creation, in a way. And Tove and Jansson and Toft share certain other similarities. They both create from scratch, from the miniature. They begin with a mysterious word, a name, and from there, a signature, a character takes form, becomes real. But eventually, the created Moomin or numeralite outgrows the fantasy, becomes a threat to itself and to its creator, and needs to be contained. Toft uses the crystal ball, a device made for showing and minimizing, to help the numeralite and himself, herself. And here's the quote. "It's no good," said Toft. "We can't hit back. Neither of us will ever learn to hit back. You must believe me. Make yourself tiny and hide yourself. You'll never get through this." And suddenly the crystal ball became overshadowed. A dizzy vortex opened in the heavy blue swell and then closed itself again. The creature of the protozoa group had made itself tiny and returned to its proper element. Moominpappa's crystal ball, which gathered everything and took care of everything, had opened up for the bewildered numeralite. If the crystal ball is a metaphor or symbol for the creative faculty, out of whose depths the merest flicker can grow and be transformed into an entire world, peopled by wonderful creatures, it is at the same time a container and refuge for those fictional realities. maybe like a book. And if you don't have that, the fantasy can grow too large and can threaten the well-being of its creator. We see here that the process can be reversed. So if Tove can use the crystal ball for this purpose, Tove Jansson uses her art in creating Moomin Valley as such a container for and closure, create closure for the Moomin stories. The Moomins disappear into its blue swell, containing them, helping them hide. We see Moomin Valley, we see refractions of the family, but eventually the book gathers them up and takes care of everything. And there's the signature, by the way, I forgot to show that. So in this article or presentation, I've exemplified and analyzed Tove Jansson's art of the miniature. All art is, of course, and creative work is, of course, some kind of Kleinkunst, in that it provides a smaller but more graspable world than the real. Or maybe is the real, I don't know. However, drawing on Gaston Bachelard's essay on the miniature, the claim put forth here is that Jansson's Moominalism is a particularly good example, at least in my mind, of the miniaturizing imagination. Bachelard argues that the miniature, instead of implying reduction, is a condensation and enrichment. And he goes on to compare the minuscule with a narrow gate that opens up an entire world. Tove Jansson's Moominalism provides that gate, opening up the fictional world of the Moomin trolls. Thank you. I can also just show you this. This is something that I was struck by. This is the cover. I can show you here are some of the. This is late in November, the Swedish version. Here's an English one. Here are some others. You can see how the illustrators have done different things with this. But the adult first edition in Finland looked like this. And of course, for me, who was totally focused on little details, I noticed when I got this from the antiquarian bookseller that there was a little spot here. You can't see on this because the quality here is not, but it's on this one. So I thought, wow, the last page in Sent in November, Tove goes down and he's going to meet he understands the Moomin family are coming back. And he can see far out at sea the little light from the lanterns. And I was so excited when I saw on my copy that there was just one drop of ink in there. And so I wrote about it on Facebook. And Boel Westin, she responded, I also have the first edition. There is no spot on mine. But I didn't give up. So I actually then contacted university libraries, because there are only like 500 copies of this adult sort of cover around. And on some of them, I found a spot, and on some of them I didn't, which is completely inexplicable. How is this possible? Because I kind of got the fantasy that Tove Jansson ran down to the printers and just added that to a few of the copies. I don't know. Anyway, so I even got the original from Tampere University Library, the actual one that was used as the basis for the cover. No spot. So, but this is what happens when you find a analytical tool and then you want to see, okay, so what is the implication? Here's just this little spot. Because for me, it means that she also in the illustration shows the Moomins are coming back. But if there is no lantern, they're not coming back. The whole interpretation of the book is altered, right? Yeah, anyway, this is what happens when you find one way of analyzing something and then it becomes very important suddenly. And just to show that one very sort of extremely minor detail can also be significant. Anyway, this is the outline for the book. The very short chapters in line. It's a short book, but it will be, the chapters will only be like 1,500 words, 2,000 words. also in line with the whole miniature idea. So these will be like mini essays. Although the letters, islands and valleys, mementos and souvenirs, these are kind of biographical things. Dolls, doll houses, but then also the picture books, maps and movies, comics, movie little company, microscopes and telescopes, details and decoration, art and park. This is what I talked about. These two I've already written about what you say. Monks and merch. We also have the art and literature. So these are some of the outline of the book that I'm planning. Yeah. All right.
Thank you so much for this fascinating journey.